Okay, what's on the agenda for today? What we have here is a D-104 power mic for a CB radio. So this power mic is pretty old and it's pretty dated and it needs a lot of work. So let's see what we can do to bring this back to life. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead and take out the bottom plate here and see how it's looking underneath. Okay. So first thing, usually there's a schematic here on the bottom, and since the remnants aren't in there, it's obvious this has been opened before, and typically it would be open because this works off a 9-volt battery. Okay, this is a power mic. So that's first and foremost. Now looking at the bottom of this, I don't see anything completely crazy. All the wires seem intact. There's nothing loose. You know, a little bit of hair, I guess. Nothing shorted that I can see. So we're going to go ahead and take this apart because we want to clean this whole thing up, and I'm going to repaint this, strip this and repaint the base. So let's go with this. Okay, this electrical tape here is in pretty bad shape. So it holds the two wires that aren't used in this configuration. There's an electric and there's a relay switch here. So depending if your CB radio uses a relay for its power, for its microphone switching, we leave it on E for electric. It's most modern radios. So what we're going to do is we need to take out this circuit board, and we're going to also need to unsolder some wires. So we take a picture and notate where all the wires from this cable here are located. There's your ground, there's your red, black, and white. Okay, we're going to take a picture of that to remember and unsolder that. Okay, so in the meantime, this top piece here unscrews. And the microphone should just wiggle itself up and out. You can see the pins that hold it in place. We're going to take this apart and I'm going to polish it with aluminum foil, bring it back to life. So I could take the easy way out, not unsolder anything, and just mask this off and paint this whole bottom base. But that would just be too easy. So okay, next thing we're going to do is take these screws here out. Because we're going to clean these screws up. We'll replace this one at the top because it looks pretty wickedly rusted and it looks like someone stripped it a little bit. So we have to contend with that. What this screw on the top does is it holds the pin in place, so for the microphone to plug in. So what's going to happen is when we take this, we're going to unsolder the wires here for that and pull this out from the top. Maybe we might be able to just pull this out a little bit and get away with that without having to really take the whole thing apart. Let's see what happens. Didn't really want to pull that all the way down that way. I'm going to pull it up this way. There's felt here so it doesn't scratch up this. You can leave the felt on if it's in good shape or replace the felt. We might just replace the felt. Okay. Yeah, I think we can go ahead and just leave this without unsoldering all the wires in here. That might be good enough because there's still ample room to paint and not leave any of the paint undone here. So I think that's a just much easier route to take. So I think that's what we're going to do. So if we do that, we can screw these back in. This will have to be cleaned, so I think I'll unsolder at least this in order to clean the cord. Okay, so let's do that. Before we polish anything, let's mask this off and get this painted. Okay, so now let's start stripping the paint off of this. I'm using aircraft remover. Okay, it's been about 45 minutes and this is sludgy at this point, and it's easy to see that the paint is starting to peel off, so it's not flaking like some paints do when you apply stripper on it. This is coming out kind of a little grainy like sand, so but it looks like it definitely did the job because I'm slowly just taking the paint off with the paintbrush. So I'm going to head over to my industrial sink and take this off there, and I'll be back because the next thing we're going to attack is the microphone cable. Okay, so I took this to the sink, took off what was left of the stripper, and this is what we got. Now what I did do is wet sand it with 500 grit sandpaper. Wet sanded it and got all of the imperfections, as many as I could, out, but we're going to prime this, and so hopefully the primer will fill in just a little bit of the tiny little imperfections here. Otherwise we'll have to putty it up and smooth it out. But the end paint on this is going to be a hammer-like paint, and it has little tiny little ridges in it, kind of. So I think the small imperfections, even if they're there with the primer, will kind of blend in when we put the final paint coat on it. So that's what we'll look forward to. So what we're going to do now, while I mask this off and primer this, is we're going to clean this microphone cord. Now what I have here is a mean green. They're in Snapple bottles, but I reuse the mean green solution. Remember, it's mean green, not simple green. I don't know if simple green will work the same or not, but I have such success with mean green, that's what I use. So I'm going to fill this up. Some mean green solution here. And we're going to dip this cord in here, like so. And I can already see some of the curling from the dirt that's on this cord. We won't need this excess bottle. So we're going to leave this in here for a few hours and come back and clean it off and see what it looks like when we're done. Okay, so after all that, this is a bit of a tougher one. I think I'm going to have to just take some spare parts in order to restore this, because these screws are different. These are called Chicago screws, by the way. They're used in binders and scrapbooking. So if you need to ever have replacement screws, look for Chicago screws for scrapbooking. So let's see how much of this we can salvage before we go to our spare parts and look for better quality. Okay, I want cleaner cable. So, got that done.
Okay, so what I've got here is the finished painted base. Basically, you saw how it was stripped. I primered it first, but you don't really need to. With the paint that I used a Rust-Oleum hammered silver. The hammered paint basically adds some texture to it. It comes out very glossy, so what I did is I then clear coated it with a matte clear finish. So that's the base. So we'll finished polishing the center shaft here with Blue Magic, so that came out all nice and shiny. The other thing that I did is I found another back for the microphone, because that other one was so badly pitted. This one's not as bad. So I replaced the rear casing, and I also replaced the screws on it. We cleaned the cord, so that looks nice and clean now. Finished polishing up, this took a lot of time, but I finished polishing up the chrome on the trigger. So we're ready to put this back together at this point. So first thing we're going to do is line up the holes here on this. And now I could polish up the screws, but I chose not to because I kind of like the little tarnished look, the little patina that's on them. So I just left these the way they are. So I'll put the rear one in first to hold this in place. Okay. And then I still see some spots here, so I'm gonna, before I put the trigger back on, I'm gonna polish this up just a little bit more. Okay, I polished this up just a little bit more before I put the trigger back on, so now let's put the trigger back on here. Basically this goes back on like so. And there's 2 screws on the bottom. Okay. Goes on just fine like that. There's also a set screw on the top for the plug here for the microphone, but we kind of pushed it in a little bit, so we're going to have to push it back up. Okay, so I used a pin basically to help guide this little plug here. You can see that little plug, and that's what the microphone, so the pin, one of the pins should line up with this notch. You can see that it has a little crack in it, but it's just a surface crack, so you know it's not going to impact the performance any. And the microphone gets screwed in here, so there's a hole on this plug that lines up here with the hole just above the trigger, and that's where we're screwing it down, and that holds this plug from being pushed down into the shaft. So now that we've got that, and you don't want to over tighten because you don't want to mess up the threads on this, so it's nice and sturdy. So what are we going to do next here? Let's move this camera up a little. So the next thing is so this holds the trigger in place. So the trigger is working, we know that. So the next thing is to put this, and this slides down real nice and smooth because of the new felt that we put in there. So what this is this locks. If you move it all the way down, it opens it up. If you move it all the way up, it keeps this locked down, so you constantly talk and not have to keep pushing the trigger down. So there you go. So the last piece of this is going to be putting this microphone back in, but before we do that, I'm going to take this to a soldering station and solder these solder this cord back in. And so let's go ahead and do that next, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I went and soldered the cord back in. Here you can see, just for your own edification, and in case you have one of these that's unwired, you can see what the wiring looks like inside and what's hooked up to where. Be careful, don't follow the color codes per se. You're going to have to use a tester and see what keying down opens up in terms of the pins. So this is a 4-pin plug. It goes to a Cobra. So let's, before we put the bottom back on, let's go see if this works. First thing we're going to do is put the microphone back on, and you can see the little tab in the back lines up and plugs right in, and then it just tightens down. Okay, so there you go. Doesn't that look beautiful? All right, so let's go plug this in and see if it works instead of just, looking at it. Okay, so now let's see if this thing works. So this is the Cobra 2000 GTL. It takes a 5-pin microphone. This microphone only has 4 pins, so we put an adapter from 5 to 4. We're going to unscrew the current microphone that's on here. Before we do so, we got to attach a battery to this so we have modulation. Okay, well, we'll just leave that out for now. So I noticed right off the bat that we kind of put this this bracket in backwards. Really, we're going to turn it around. It should be facing that way, like that. But that's an easy fix. So let's go and plug this guy in. Turn this on. And moment of truth, what you want to see is these 2 pins, these 2 meters here going. So let's do that. Break 19 for radio check. There you go. Works like a charm. That is your modulation signal. That shows you how much wattage you're putting through. Break 12 for a radio check. And it's 2 watts on purpose, and some of you CB guys probably understand why. So we change a little something here. Break channel 19 for a radio check. There you go. It's a little bit more. So you can pump the microphone up a little bit with a screwdriver to turn this up. This helps amplify, but you don't want to amplify too much because your voice then becomes kind of staticky, kind of defeats the purpose. You want to kind of peak things out so your voice is crystal clear and as loud as possible without losing, without getting distorted. Anyways, that's a whole nother topic if you want to get into CB radios, but there you go. Wonderfully restored. We're ready to put the bass back on. We'll just flip this over on this little bracket, and nicely restored D-104 power mic. One for the books. Alrighty, so now that we've tested that and we know everything works, we got to flip this around here. So I'll go this way. It's more for aesthetics. If I wanted it, because I'm right-handed, I like to hold the mic in my left hand, but if I wanted to keep it that way, I'd have to turn this. There'd be some finagling. I wouldn't have to turn this, I would have to flip the face plate and the back plate so the microphone would face that way. A lot easier for me to make the change like this. And there you go, it just looks more aesthetically pleasing. So at this point, all we need to do is just, if you were going to use it, you'd put the battery in. But you want to line up the hole here on the base with this potentiometer, because that's where you put in a screwdriver to turn your modulation from the microphone up or down. So get these screws in here. I don't like to over tighten these screws either. The threads are fine, but also you want to unscrew it relatively easily to replace the battery in here. So got to keep that in mind. All right. So there you go. Got a nice, shiny D-104 microphone with a nice clean cord and a nice modulation to it and nice painted bass. There you go. Another one for the shelf. So I hope I gave you some motivation. Not much really to learn out of this video except maybe how to polish. Some of you might not even have known about the aluminum foil and vinegar trick to it. Especially with chrome, but I would be careful with that just to make sure it doesn't scratch up your surface. That works really good on this kind of chrome, but just be careful with that. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it, and have fun, restore, play, enjoy life.